Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Easy Learn. And today's topic is algebra, within which we're going to be looking at how to expand and simplify pairs. So, to begin with, we have a few questions here. So, we have two brackets here, x plus 5 and another x minus 1. And there is nothing mentioned in between. Now, it's important to remember that whenever you don't have anything in between, it always means a multiplication sign, which means that I have to multiply x plus 5 with x minus 1. Now you just can't simply do that, okay, maybe x times minus 1 is just minus x and 5 times x is 5x and that's it, we're done. We can't do that. Always remember, whenever you have four terms altogether, your answer also is supposed to have four terms, right? Which means that in order to multiply these two brackets, I need to do x times x, then I need to do x times negative 1, then I need to do 5 times x, and then I need to do 5 times minus 1. So we are supposed to have four answers like that. So x times x means that if I do x times x, so there are two x's, so my answer becomes x squared. Then the next thing I have x times minus 1. So when I have x times minus 1, x times 1 is just 1 and there's a minus sign. So which means a plus sign multiplied by a minus sign gives me a minus sign. So I have minus x. Then the next part I have 5 times the x. So 5 times x means I'm going to be doing 5 times x like that. So 5 times x just gives me 5x. And then 5 times minus 1. So 5 times minus 1 means 5 times 1 is just 5 and there's a negative sign there. So I'm going to write minus 5. Now, if I sum these up together in one single equation, then I have something like this: x times x, that gave me x squared, x times minus 1, that gave me minus 1x, or I can just also write minus x. Minus x or minus 1x is the same thing. There's just an invisible one here, and you should know that whenever you see a minus x, it actually means minus 1x. And then I have 5 times x, that gave me a plus 5x, and then because it was a positive, a positive 5 times a positive x means a positive 5x, and then a positive 5 times negative 1 means minus 5. Now that I have these four terms, I can simplify the like terms. I've discussed this in my previous videos before, that what are like terms? Like terms are basically those that belong to the same family. For example, this one, this is an x squared. It has a square on the top. Do I have anything that has a square on the top? No, it doesn't, which means that this x square is not a like term to anybody else. Similarly, this negative 5. This negative 5 is just a number, and if you look at it carefully, you don't have another term that just has a number. This one has an x squared, this one has x and a 5x, which means there is no single number, which means that minus 5 does not have any like term. But if I look at these two, if you see, there's a minus 1x and there's a positive 5x. Now both of them have numbers and both of them have the variable also, which means both of these are like terms. Now these belong to the same family, which means I can do any of the operation on these two, which means I can add them or I can subtract them. Now there's a minus and a plus. Now whenever you have a minus and a plus, you always subtract. And how do you decide if it's a positive answer or a negative answer? The sign depends on the big number. Whichever is your bigger number, that sign you have to take in your answer. Which means that if I have a 1 and a 5, I gotta be subtracting them. So if I do 5 minus 1, 5 minus 1 is 4. Now, do I take a positive 4 or a negative 4? Now, which one is my bigger number out of 1 and 5? 5 is my bigger number. What sign do you see beside 5? There's a positive sign, which means my answer is also supposed to be positive. So I have a positive 4 here. What about the x squared and the negative 5? Because they have no like terms, they don't belong to any family, they just come down straight away the way they are. So x squared just comes down as x squared, negative 5 just comes down as negative 5, and then minus x plus 5x, as you know, it gave me positive 4, so I'm just going to write plus 4 and x. Because there's an x involved, so I can't just, ignore the x. So minus x plus 5x gives me a 4x. This is my final answer. That is x squared plus 4x minus 5. And this is known as a quadratic equation. It's called a quadratic equation. Why is it called a quadratic equation? Because it has an x squared involved. So whenever you have a square on the top, it's a quadratic equation. Afterwards, if I have to find the value of x out of this equation, then that's the whole different story, that how I should be finding that out. We'll be discussing this in the later videos, but for now we just need to know how to expand brackets. If there are two brackets in here, how do I open up, how do I multiply them with each other? And I'm supposed to end up in four terms initially, and once I have my like terms, I just put them together and I'll be getting my three final terms. So that's how you solve your equations. Moving on to the next example. Now this one we have a 2y with a y. So again, the whole thing remains the same, the concept remains the same. The first number with the first number here, then the first number with the second number. Then the second number with the first number, the second number with the second number. So 2y times y. So 2y times y means there's a y and a y, there are two y's here, so I have a y squared. Then 2y times 3. Now 3 times 2 gives me 6. So I write 6 and y just comes as it is. So 2y times 3 gives me 6y. Now the next part, 1 times y. So 1 times y is just 1y, or you can just write it as y. And then 3 times 1 obviously is just 3. Now I have these four terms, so 2y times y gave me 2y squared, then 2y times 3 gave me 6y, and then 1 times y just gave me a y, and then 1 times 3 just gave me a 3. Now this is the second last step of my solution, where I have a y squared, I have a 3, and everything else. Now because I will be looking at the like terms now, 2y square and 3 does not have any like terms. 3 is a number. There is no other number that is just one single number. There is nobody like that. So I'm just going to grab down my 3 just the way it is. Similarly, my 2y squared, there is no other term that has a square on the top, which means that there are no like terms of this number. So I'm just going to take down my 2y square the way it is. But my 6y and my y, they're both from the same family. Y just means 1y. So y and y belong to the same family and they have a 6 and a 1, which means I'm going to be adding it up because both of them have positive signs. So 6 plus 1 is 7. So 6y plus 1y gives me 7y. So this is my final answer. That is 2y squared plus 7y plus 3. Because this has a plus sign, here we have all plus signs, so my entire equation stays positive, right? So this is how I end up in a quadratic equation again. Moving on. Now the next question says something like this. 4x plus 1 and then 3x minus 5. Again, there's a multiplication sign in between. Now I'm going to do 4 times 3. Again, you should know that when there's an x and another x, there are two x's. So x multiplied by x gives me x squared. So it's basically like this. 4 times x times 3 times x. So 4 times 3 gives me a 12, and then x times x, there are two x's, so I just write x to the power of 2. That's how you write it down. So 4x times 3x gave me a 12x squared. Then I'm going to do 4x times negative 5. So 4x times negative 5 means 4 times negative 5 is supposed to be a negative 20, because a plus multiplied with a minus always gives the answer in minus. So which means that 4x times negative 5 gives me negative 20. Once I'm done with the first number, with first and second both, then I'm going to be doing 1 times 3x. So 1 times 3x is equal to just 3x, and then 1 times negative 5 is just going to be negative 5. Because again, positive times a negative gives me a negative answer and negative 5. Now, here 4 times negative 5 was negative 20. I forgot to write the x, so x just comes as it is. So 4x times negative 5 gives me negative 20x. Now if I sum it up together and write it as one single equation, I have 12x squared minus 20x plus 3x minus 5. If this whole splitting up part confuses you, you can just simply write them in this one single equation from the very beginning. You just do 4x times 3x, which gives you 12x squared, then 4x times negative 5, negative 20x, then 1 times 3x gives you 3x, and then 1 times negative 5, negative 5. Now again, 12x squared and negative 5, both do not have any like terms, but 20 and 3, because they have x's attached to them, they're both the same. They both are like terms to each other. Now there's a 20 and a 3. Now whenever you have a positive and a negative and you're doing additions and subtractions, then you always subtract the two numbers. And as I told you, sign of the big number. So now, what are my two numbers? 20 and 3. So 20 and 3, I'm supposed to be subtracting them. So I do 20 minus 3, which gives me a 17. Now, do I have a positive 17 or a negative 17? Now I have to decide which number is bigger, 20 or 3. Then obviously 20 is a bigger number, and this 20 has a negative sign, which means my 17 is also supposed to be negative. So now, grabbing my 12x squared just the way it is, negative 20x plus 3x gave me a negative 17x. Don't forget to write the x, and then I have a negative 5. So this is my final equation, which is, as you know, known as a quadratic equation because it has an x squared involved. So 12x squared minus 17x minus 5 is my quadratic equation that I found from multiplying these two pairs. Moving on. Now, this is a little complicated question, but it's almost the same. Okay, now we have a w plus 3 times a w plus 4. Then there is a plus sign in between, do not forget. And we have a w plus 2 times a w plus 7. So between these two brackets, I have a multiplication sign. Between these two pairs and two pairs, I have a plus sign. And again, on this side, I have a multiplication sign. Now, w times w, again, there are two w's, so I write it down as w squared. Then w times positive 4 gives me 4w. 4 times w is 4w. And then 3 times w is 3w. Again, there's a positive sign, so it stays positive 3w. Then 3 times 4, refer to your times table, it's 3 times 4 is 12. Now this is one equation that I found. Now there's a plus sign in between. Do not forget. Now the second part is, again, w times a w, which is w squared. Then w times a 7, which is 7w. Then we have a 2 times a w, which is 2w. And then 2 times a 7, which is 14. 2 times 7 gives me 14. Now this is a huge part of the equation. Now this is one part and this is one part. So first I can just um, add up the the two chunks that I've got. Let me just figure out the like terms there. W squared does not have any like term right now. 12 does not have any like term, but 4 and 3, 4w and 3w, they're like terms to each other. They belong to the same family. So I'm just going to do 4 plus 3. That gives me 7 and a w attached. And then w squared stays where it is. W squared plus 7w plus 12. And on the other hand, I have again a w squared. Now 7w and 2w, so 7 plus 2 gives me 9, and the w just comes the way it is. So w squared plus 9w, and the 14 does not have any other like term, so it just comes down like that. Now, at this point, now I can see that everybody is a like term to another number, which means w squared is a like term to w squared. So w squared and w squared, there's an invisible 1 here, which means that there's a 1 plus 1. 1 plus 1 gives me a 2, so I have a 2w squared. And then I have a 7w and a 9w. Now w and w, which means they belong to the same family. So 7 plus 9 gives me a 16. So I'm just going to be writing 16w. Make sure you do not miss out the letters, the variables that are attached with your numbers. Otherwise, you'll just end up getting confused and you will have a wrong answer. So 7 plus 9 gave me a 16 and w. Now I have 12 and a 14. Now 12 and a 14 are like terms to each other. So I'm just going to do 12 plus 14. That gives me 4 plus 2, 6, and 26. So which means 2w squared plus 16w plus 12 plus 14. That gives me a 26. So this is going to be my final equation, that is 2w squared plus 16w plus 26. Now, one interesting thing that I can do with this equation is, as you can see, all the entire equation has even numbers. 2 is an even number, 16 is an even number, 26 is an even number, which means they are all divisible by 2. So if I divide the whole equation by 2, just so that it becomes a more simplified version, I need to simplify. Whenever you have equations or anything else, perhaps you need to simplify them just to make them easier. So if I divide the entire thing with 2, so that means 2 times 1 gives me 2, 2 times 8 gives me 16, and 2 times 13 gives me 26. So now my new equation is 1w square, or I just write it down like w square, and then plus 16w turned into 8, which means that it becomes 8w, and then 26 turned into a 13, so I have plus 13, which means my final equation now is w squared plus 8w plus 13. So this is how I end up writing my final equation. Moving on. Now here I have a similar question just with some different values. So again, 3y times y gives me 3y squared, then 3y times 4, which means 3 times 4 is 12, and then I have a 12y, and then negative 5 times y would give me negative 5y, and negative 5 times positive 4 gives me a negative 20. Then maybe I could just simplify this further, where I figure out the like terms, that is 12y and minus 5y. 3y squared doesn't have a like term, so it just comes down the way it is. 12y minus 5y means it's a 7y, and then minus 20. Now here's a little different part over here, that is this negative sign. So we need to be very, very careful when we're dealing with negative signs. So I have a negative sign here. Let me put that in, and then rest of the stuff I'm going to be putting inside a bracket so that I do not end up confusing myself in the end. So then I have y times a y, which is y squared, then y times a negative 5, which is negative 5y, then negative 3 times y is a negative 3y, and negative 3 times negative 5. So a negative multiplied with a negative is always a positive. So 3 times 5 is 15. Negative times negative is a positive. So I have a positive 15. Now I have a negative sign here. Again, inside I can now solve the like terms. So y squared just comes down the way it is because um, there is no like term of the y square. Now minus 5y and minus 3y. Now whenever we have a minus and a minus, you always add them up, and the answer is always supposed to be in negative. That's the rules. That's the basic plus and minus rules. So minus 5 minus 3, which means that I'm going to do 5 plus 3, that is 8. And because the rules say that negative and negative gives you a negative, so I'm going to be having negative 8. So y squared minus 8 plus 15 is my simplified version. Now, here's the tricky part. Now, when I had a positive sign, life is just easy. You just did whatever you liked. But when I have a negative sign, everything changes. Why? Because a negative multiplied with a positive or a negative, everything changes. So a negative times a positive a negative times a positive always gives me a negative. A negative times a negative always gives me a positive, which means that this whole part, that is 3y squared plus 7y minus 20, just comes down the way it is. But everything of this part, the signs have to change because there's a negative sign outside. So a negative times a positive gives me a negative. So my y squared turns negative. Then my negative times my negative 8. So negative times negative gives me a positive, which means I should have a... Oh, here I forgot. See, this is the mistake we mostly make, that we forget about the fact that if there was a minus 5 and a minus 3 and it gave me minus 8, then there's also a y attached here. So I have to make sure that I have a y squared minus 8y plus 15. Now, moving on, this negative times the negative 8y gives me, as I said, negative times negative gives a positive answer. So negative times negative 8y gives me positive 8y, and then again negative times positive, this one, negative times positive gives me a negative 15. Now that I have all of this set here, now I'm going to be subtracting the like terms. Now 3y squared is a like term to y squared, and there's a 3y squared minus y squared means there's an invisible 1. So 3 minus 1 gives me 2. So I have 2y and a square. Do not forget to write down the square, otherwise it's going to be wrong. So 3y squared minus y squared, or minus 1y squared, gives me 2y squared. Then I have a 7y which is a like term to 8y. Both belong to the same family, both have a y attached to them. So I have a 7 plus 8 that gives me a 15y. So I'm going to be writing 2y squared plus 15y. Now this negative 20 is a like term to my negative 15. So I have, again, now when you have a negative sign and another negative sign, as I told you, you add them up. In addition and subtraction rules, you add them up and the sign is always supposed to be negative, which means there's a 20 and a 15. So I'm just going to be doing 20 plus 15, that is 5 plus 0 is 5, 2 plus 1 is 3, so my answer is 35. But because both the numbers have a negative sign, so the answer also has a negative sign. So I have 2y squared plus 15y minus 35. This is my final equation. Now here I have a 35, here I have a 15. If here I had another number or something that was divisible by maybe 5, I could have easily simplified this equation because there's a 15 and a 35, both are divisible by 5. But 2 is not divisible by 5, which means I cannot simplify this equation. 15 and 35 do not come in the table of 2. So I just leave my equation right here. That is 2y squared plus 15y minus 35. That's pretty much it. That's how you solve this entire equation. Now, moving on to this one, now we have a 4y squared and a 2y. Now here it's slightly different because you already have a square in there and then you have another y, which means if I do 4y squared with a 2y, so it's like this. 4y squared means 4 times y times y. Y squared means there are two y's involved. And then multiplied by 2y means multiplied by 2 times another y. So firstly, I'm going to be doing 4 times 2, that is 8, and then y times y times y, there are three y's, so I'm going to be writing y cubed, which is y to the power of 3. And then 4y squared times 1, so 4y squared times 1 is just 4y squared. Then I have the next term, that is 5 times 2. So 5 times 2 is 10, and there's a y with that. So I'm just going to write 5 times 2y is equal to 10y. And then I have a 5 times 1, which I'm just going to be writing as 5. Now, as you can see, there are no like terms to each other. There's a cube, there's a square, there's a single variable y, and then there's a 5. So nobody is basically forming a like term with the other. Now the next part, now there's a minus 3y here. Now minus 3y times y squared means y times y. So y times y times y is y cubed. Minus 3 stays the way it is and I have a minus 3y cubed. And then I have minus 3y times minus 6. So minus 3y times minus 6, a minus multiplied by a minus always gives you a positive, and then 3 times 6 is 18, and there's a y attached, so I have a minus 3y cubed plus 18y. Now I have to see that what am I forming? Do I have any like terms? Because this and this, everything is the same. They're all in one single line. Let me just write them down. So I have 8y cubed plus 4y squared plus 10y plus 5, and then I have a minus 3y cubed plus 18y. Now this 8y cubed and minus 3y cubed, they are the same family because both of them have a y cube, which means I can easily add or subtract them. So I'm just going to be doing 8 minus 3. So 8 minus 3 means I have to subtract them. 8 minus 3 gives me 5. And then I have to be seeing that what is the bigger number. 8 is the bigger number and 8 has a positive sign, which means my answer is supposed to be positive. So I have 8 minus 3, that gave me 5, and then there's a y cubed attached. So I'm just going to write 5y cubed, and then I have a 4y squared. So I'm just going to write plus 4y squared, and then I have a 10y and an 18y. So 10 and 18, because both of them have a y, so they are like terms to each other. So I'm just going to do 10 plus 18, that is 8 plus 0, 8, 1 plus 1, 2. So my answer is 28. And because both are positive, my answer is also positive. So 5y cubed plus 4y squared plus 18y, and then what else is remaining? Just plus 5 is remaining, and there's no like term to a positive 5, which means that I can just simply write it down like that. Plus 4y, sorry, plus 5, and that's it. So 5y cubed plus 4y squared plus 18y plus 5 is my final equation. I can't further do anything with that. I can't simplify it any further because they're all different terms. There are two fives there. There's a 4 and an 18, but nobody is divisible by any one single number, which means I just let my entire equation be the way it is. So 5y cubed plus 4y squared plus 18y plus 5 is my final answer. That's pretty much it. Thank you so much for watching Easy Learn. If you have any questions, any confusions, you can drop them down in the comment section below. Do not forget to like, share, and subscribe my channel. Thank you so much for watching.